Another middle school young lady said, "Mr. Almendarez, I just wish the teacher would pronounce my name correctly because when she doesn't, she's taking my identity away." And these are all non-academic issues that these kids are having. But what the kids were telling us in the 3 years that we were doing these listening sessions was that there's a disconnect between what the adults expect and what we're going through.
There are so many opportunities, challenges, concerns, issues around AI and K through 12. We wanted to explore all those and just had a great conversation with a former school superintendent, Santa Ana in California. He is also the founder of the Creative Futures Collaborative. His name is Jerry Almendarez, and his episode is coming up. Jerry Almendarez, founder of Creative Futures Collaborative. Welcome to the Human Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We are interested in the AI moment with regard to K through 12, and you're the perfect person for us to talk to because ultimately, prior to founding the Creative Futures Collaborative, you have been a school superintendent, you've been a principal, you've been in the mix for a long time. Tell us a little bit about why you've decided to transition to Creative Futures and a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, I was really enlightened during the COVID period, transitioning from one district to my previous one, Santa Ana Unified School District in 2020. And then I'm going to say 3 months after my transition, COVID hit. And then we began to navigate like everybody else across the country, trying to figure out how we're going to open up better than we went in. And in Santa Ana, historically, we were below average when it came to academic performance. About the same time, OpenAI released ChatGPT. We began to look at the platform and very quickly realized the power of it, even at its infancy. And we felt it was like the Apple iPhone moment. It was the technology that was not going to go away. It was anything was going to accelerate. And so the more we started to embrace the platform, and then slowly after ChatGPT's release, other platforms began to surface. We began to use the platforms and experiment and explore with them. And ultimately, we landed on how can they be used for governance and for enhance our decision making when it came to the initiatives that we were rolling out. And we thought that if this technology has the power that it does, just imagine it in the hands of the teachers and students, especially in a district like Santa Ana. If we're going to reimagine what education and teaching looks like, this is a perfect opportunity. So we began to have conversations district-wide. We began to explore the possibilities of how the platforms could be used. We began to open up certain platforms to our teachers and to our administrators and district office people, and then ultimately ended up getting a lot of momentum. We created our AI guidance policy and then continue that work. They're continuing that work as we speak right now, even though I've been gone for about a year now.
So how do you see it working? So obviously you're looking at it in two ways. You're looking at it from the administration perspective on how you can leverage it to perform whatever duties and responsibilities and deliverables you are there. But then, the monster question is then what happens inside the classrooms?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, outside the classrooms. What do schools do here when this powerhouse tool can effectively do all the homework?
Well, our initial engagement with the platform was to learn as much as we can about it at the executive cabinet level so we can get a better understanding of how it can be used in the classroom with the teachers and the students. And so as we began to learn the power of the platforms, the features that the platforms were developing, our use evolved as the platforms evolved. And so once our Ed Service team, really was excited about it and turned it over to their directors, executive directors, and then ultimately the staff developers, there was so much, and we didn't unilaterally require this. We used our acceptable use agreement, which basically says no personal private information in there. And we started very small scale with a small pilot, and because we wanted to make sure that if there were anything was going to go wrong, it would go wrong at a much small scale and not have this unilateral um, cutoff if heaven forbid something went wrong. So over time, the staff development was a parallel path. One, it was open it up for the classroom teachers, look at how it can be used for instruction, teaching, and learning. The other path was, okay, let's get this into our principals' hands. Let's have them use the tools to help them develop better school site improvement plans, help them develop strategic rollout plans, help them to be able to communicate whatever way they needed to communicate. And we didn't just do it with one platform, we did it with multiple platforms because we didn't know who was going to rise to the top, or who was going to be there one day and gone the next. So we made the intentional decision to start small, give access to the people that were excited, enthused about it, and then ultimately open it up as more interest began to evolve around its use.
So it's only been a couple of years. Sometimes it feels like we've had it for a while, but we really
Yeah.
haven't had it for very long. And more to the point, I would say the first couple of years was an awakening rather than a collaboration to try to figure out how to use it. I think a lot of people are still coming up to speed as to how powerful it actually turned out to be, or is turning out to be. So I mean, maybe I'm having my assumptions wrong here, but my sense is that schools really haven't had more than 2 cycles to start to think about it, and really probably just this last cycle. And so the next school year is probably when things start to get real.
Yeah, it is. It's a little scary, but it's also exciting at the same time because I would say the focus has been on the classroom and the classroom teachers. Very little attention has been paid towards the site administrators or the district leadership, and that's a little worrisome for me. Which is why I started Creative Futures Collaborative, is to really train the executive leaders and the site leaders on the potential that can be used, so they understand how they could put guardrails up, at their school sites or at the
And so,
district.
so what are they at? I mean, what do you see that they need? What are they asking for? What is it that you believe they should be considering?
So I think there's a lack of unilateral policy and guardrails when it comes to a district, even county offices in some cases. People are using it. They may be using it in isolation. Districts and counties are providing the available platforms that are typically the enterprise models because they're more secure, which is understandable. But
And
I also know.
these are basically the large language models that we're all familiar with, or are these kind of more specific
No,
education?
they're the models that we are all familiar with, like Gemini and ChatGPT. Claude is starting to emerge because how it's begin to evolve. But so what I see is that people are using these platforms, some with county or district knowledge, and others without. And sometimes, in some cases, they're using the district's platform, and then they're using their personal platform because the district's platform is much limited in the features that they offer. And so my concern is that without a unilateral understanding at the county or district leadership executive cabinet level, there are features that could be opened up to district leaders, staff developers that would dramatically enhance their capability to serve the school sites, to provide staff development, enhance staff development. But because there are limits and blocks on some of these features, they're delayed. The staff will go and use their personal platforms because the features are a little bit more forgiving, with the risk of, if something goes wrong, well, then who's responsible for that? And this is why it's important for executive cabinets and district leaders to understand that, because if they understand the roadblocks that are in their director's way or their principal's way, then it would be important to have a conversation about why those roadblocks exist. Is it an IT person making that decision, or is it a policy, decision? What's the rationale behind these limits? Is it data concerns? Without having these conversations, the features get blocked and people get frustrated. They stop using them, or they use their own personal platforms.
So what are some of the things that could go wrong?
Well, you could, without the proper protocols in place, the hallucination, if the staff is not trained enough in understanding the potential for the hallucinations that could happen, they could generate reports and predictive analytics that are actually biased and potentially harm students and families and communities. And so, not to be, to instill fear in everybody, but these are the risks that we take when we don't have a coherent conversation and guidelines and rubrics, that guardrails that allow people to vet these concerns. And when people use things in isolation, they don't necessarily say, "Hey, look what I did with AI." They just give the report, send it up to their direct report. The direct report gets it, takes it to executive cabinet, gets on a board agenda for board approval. Well, that information that has landed there may or may not be accurate. It may or may not be compliance with admin regs or board policy or contract, language. So these are the risks that we take when we don't spend a little bit more time thinking, the process and the oversight that we need to have when we open up these platforms.
That sounds like a reasonably concerning risk. Certainly has some major implications if indeed hallucinations did occur. Are you seeing school districts where they are so concerned with those risks that they're kind of in a holding pattern or almost a paralysis, or are they trying to fight through those? How are you seeing people dealing with it?
So I see so I'm working with a few county offices and a few districts, and I don't know the rationale behind the decision not to move forward, but I do know that the platforms are being used in isolation, and I don't think there's a coherent tactical approach to a unilateral rollout. People have their policy, they work on the policy. Once the policy gets completed, okay, we have our policy. Now it's everybody's responsibility to follow that policy. It's their responsibility to understand it, to know it. There's no checks and balances in there. There's no what happens if the new features are available now and people have access to this. So there's got to be this ongoing conversation. There's got to be people in the organization that have been identified, that have been selected, whose job is specifically to make sure they know who's using what, how it was approved, the decision-making process that it was approved on, and then the outcomes that it's getting. Was there human judgment in the review of these outputs and outcomes because of the potential equity issues that could exist? So, are we using AI platforms to assign special ed students their programs? Well, that's a complete no-no. We shouldn't be doing that. We're using AI to determine where to place students. No, we shouldn't be using that. There's a certain level of human interaction that needs to be in place because it could cause severe harm to students or to families. Not to say you can't use it to do a summary or an analysis in those particular cases, but the final judgment and the final decision, the final rationale behind that should be documented, and it should have multiple set of eyes on the output.
And so who is ultimately responsible for getting that right? Is that that's the administration? Is it the school board? Is it where does the buck stop?
Well, ultimately, it'll be the superintendent and the Board of Education.
Yep.
They're the ones that have to answer to everything. And this is the other gap that exists is collective boards don't really, they approve the policies, but do they really know how the platforms are being approved? Do they know what happens if there are any violations of the policies, the AI policies or guidance that they have in structure? And if the answers are no to those, then if something goes wrong, or somebody uses it inappropriately, what checks and balance are we putting in place to make sure it doesn't happen again? Without that oversight, you can have a school site or a classroom using it completely inappropriately or against the policies. Nobody's saying anything, and then you know potentially something horrible could happen. And now, because there was no oversight or no checks and balances to stop that behavior from happening, now the entire district is just shut down the program, which negatively impacts everybody.
Yeah, so you have this dichotomy where you have obviously prevailing wind of this is coming and we need to get up to speed and we need to figure it out and we need to start using it, and there's kind of a sense of urgency that we may be missing it. And then there's this, kind of institutional cultural caution
Yeah.
that's baked into the system for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And those two things are working against one another.
Yes.
And so who's in charge of kind of sorting through that friction?
Well, ultimately the responsibility lies with the superintendent and the Board of Education, right? I mean, we're overseeing the operations of the district. And I think, although superintendents aren't going to pick the platforms and they're not going to make the operational decisions, but they should provide the oversight and the guidance and the structure for these
So
conversations.
who picks the platforms, if not the superintendent?
Well, who picks a platform? So teachers come to their executive cabinet members and say, I want access to this. Then the executive cabinet members, if they're open and, like-minded, they'll go to their IT department or take it to executive cabinet. And then their IT department will say yes or no, depending on which platforms that they're, using district-wide. We have some districts and counties that are only using Gemini because they're Google districts and their platforms and their features are already secure in their knowledge. And then you have other districts that use Copilot and their Microsoft districts. So it really has a tendency, depending on which platforms the district is already using, are the ones that they've really embraced. And then you have those that are a little bit more open and say, what, because ChatGPT is such a wide range, let's provide access to some of that. And a county that I'm working with right now has opened it up to their county employees, the enterprise for ChatGPT. And so, it varies, but the decision making and that structure and the guardrails for those conversations should come from the superintendent and executive cabinet. It should not be an IT decision. It needs to be
Because ultimately you're going to end up with inequity at the school level. No?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that conversation has come up because it came up when we started to roll it out a few years ago. One of the conversations we were having is people were excited about it and they wanted to share it with their sites, with their principals, right? And from the governance level, executive cabinet level, we said, okay, we will give you access. One, we wanted to roll it out slow and small because if anything went wrong, we wanted to be able to correct it. Two, we didn't know too much about the platforms because they were evolving. And so, we had to make sure that we felt comfortable at the executive cabinet level that we were in a controlled environment to the best of our ability with our current policy. Well, when more and more people wanted access to it, we started to take our foot off the pedal and slow down because things were the demand was going faster than our comfort level. And a couple of our site principals and executive directors and teachers said, this becomes an equity issue, Mr. Almendarez, if you're not opening it up for everybody. And that was a hard conversation for me to swallow because they were right. They were absolutely right. Why does this school or this area of the city get access, but these other areas don't? But it was a risk and a decision that I was willing to take because we did not know enough about the platforms, and we wanted to be cautious rather than just open it up for everybody to have access to it. And so it may not have been a popular decision, but it was a decision that I landed on and I was comfortable defending until we knew more about the features and the security issues that we were having. And ultimately we ended up opening it up more and more, but we also didn't want to force it down teachers or administrators' throat too and make it a mandatory requirement. Their peers and the families began to say, hey, they're using it in this classroom. How come we can't use it in this classroom? So it became a peer pressure type of thing, which is when we started to increase our staff development for classroom teachers. One of the things that we did, not knowing it was going to cause this friction, was we very early in this process, we started looping in parents and we started doing staff development for parents because we thought you were rolling it. We have a small rollout, controlled environment. We want to bring in parents so they can see how kids are using it, give parents access to the same platforms, let them experience what the kids are using. If we get pushback from from the meeting with the parents, then we're small enough to kind of take our foot off the pedal and redirect however we needed to. What we discovered was that the first parent information session we did it, the feedback was so popular and so exciting that they wanted more parent trainings. So we ended up rolling out more parent trainings, which then put pressure on the principals because now parents that were coming from school sites that weren't necessarily using it were saying, hey, how come I don't see anything coming out of your school site? Engaging kids and stuff like that. This is the argument that we used with our principals on the jobs of the future. If you walk into classrooms and you're looking at the instruction that takes place and you see teachers standing up in front, kids in rows, and the teacher talking all day, the question is, are we preparing kids for jobs of the future?
Well, this is why I'm fascinated by the AI in education moment, because I mean, truth be told, the delivery mechanism that we currently have of a teacher in front of a class is medieval. I mean, that goes back hundreds of years, not as old as me, which is plenty.
Yeah.
It's way back. And and because it's so well established, it's kind of a hard model to break. You're talking about a pretty well established institutional
Yeah.
delivery mechanism.
And it's not going to be broken by any one district or any county. This is a nationwide issue, historically. And it's got to be policy driven. It's got to come from state departments of ed. It's got to come from the federal government. If you take that image of a teacher standing in front of a classroom and you backwards map it, when principals have their staff meetings, it almost looks the same. Their staff comes in, the principals are sharing information, right? Well, you backwards map that up one level and you have principal meetings at the district office and you walk in and guess what? You see the same image. Executive cabinet members, handouts, agendas, and then they're standing up there talking to their principals. Well, if we're telling and pointing our fingers at our principals saying you guys need to encourage your teachers to change, what are we doing at the executive cabinet level? How are we modeling that change in behavior? That's why it's important for the executives of the organizations to really begin to embrace. What I used to tell our team was, if you're leading the same way you led last year, expect the same results. And for Santa Ana, we were historically below average. People were working hard. I mean, they were working. I saw it with my own eyes, but we weren't getting the results that we were hoping because we were just doing more of the same thing. And so when this platform came in, the question is, how are you going to lead different to be able to give kids the opportunity and teachers the opportunity to teach and learn differently?
Did the COVID experience of going virtual, and we're virtual and very comfortable with it these days. Obviously, we do this a lot for our events, and I think everybody is way more comfortable now since COVID in this idea of this. I don't know what you'd call it, a collaborative environment on a screen. Did that virtual experience, do you think that's going to have an impact on breaking the traditional paradigm of
I do.
teacher in front of classroom? Because now virtual can deliver,
Yeah,
I mean, AI can deliver virtually in a similar way to the way
exactly. I
humans
do.
delivered.
I think it's breaking down the barriers that have always been there when it comes to the ability to get a quality education. One of the things in Santa Ana, we have a high second language population, high immigrant population, right? One of the things that we're able to do was to meet the needs of our communities and our families that did not feel safe for a variety of political, issues going on. And we were able to make some adjustments to our models to offer an online course. So kids still had access to the instruction. They didn't feel like they had to risk, leaving their house to come to school. Then one of the things that we discovered during COVID was we had kids not on camera or kids not showing up, certain hours of the day. And so what we discovered was they were busy taking care of their siblings, or they had to find a job in order to help support their families because their parents may have been out of work or been sick or, passed. And so the conversations that we were having during COVID and as we were coming out is like, why does school have to be in a brick and mortar 5 days out of the week? Could it be 3 days brick and mortar, 2 days out in the community, learning? Why do we have to have, why does school have to start at 8 p.m. and end at 2:30 p.m.? Can we have flipped sessions, a morning session and an evening session? That way, if if a student needs us to babysit their siblings, they can stay home while the parents work. And then when they come back from work, they can go to the evening session. So I think it's going to, the times and the evolution of these technologies have evolved so much where we are forced to begin to have these conversations because what we're doing is not meeting the needs of our students and our families. They're walking, they're going other places. There was one study that came out, and I forget the name of the organization. It's in California that said 74,000 students are missing from the attendance rules. Well, where are they going? They're leaving the state. They're going to charters. They're going, doing homeschool. We're not meeting the needs. And
So
so
do you think that's being driven by a socioeconomic issue, or is it now being driven by the kind of interest and access to the new technology?
I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination. The economy in Orange County, we were losing kids pretty steadily because families couldn't afford the cost of living out there. And then you add on top of that the immigration policies. So in 1 year, we almost doubled our declining enrollment rate. And so, having to navigate those challenges, which impact the local businesses. Now they have to close them. Where do they, they're gonna have to relocate. So it's just this domino effect. And I think that's why it's important for this problem to be solved by a collective group of people. It's going to need business owners. It's going to need county offices of ed, state legislatures, to universities to change their expectations and their structures. And so, how do we begin to have these conversations to be able to start to head in that direction? Is the question, the $1 million question.
So you mentioned parents. Where do parents fit in this equation? Are you seeing them? You mentioned that they're curious about how it works and whether or not their kid is getting the latest access and so forth. But what are you hearing from parents? I mean, is there kind of a thirst to go full steam ahead, or is there more of a concern that, hey, less screens is better? I've heard
Yeah.
both.
So so it's a combination of both. You have parents in the early stages of parents were excited as they learned more about the platforms. They got a little concerned, a little worried because they were thinking, is it going to take my job? And so, but once, you begin to understand the platforms and their potential, we're still going to need humans in the decision-making process. The question is, what type of humans are we going to need? We're going to need the humans that know how to use the technology, how to guide it and prompt it and question it. Those are the ones that are going to probably be more competitive. So as the families begin to understand, and as we were having conversations with families about, is this increasing my cognitive ability or decreasing it? Well, it depends how you interact with it and depends on the training that you get. But let's show you how we're using it. Then you start to get parents and community members saying, well, I need to learn this because I need to be competitive and marketable if my job changes. So, that was the whole leverage point for us, was really not as a hindrance and as a watch out, look out, because this thing's coming and it's going to take your job. But it's, okay, here's a new technology. How are we going to adjust our demand and our skills to be able to sustain this transition that's happening and be more competitive? And it's not just for the regional or the local jobs. These are global jobs. Kids can work remotely, like we talked about. And the kids in Santa Ana have so many more assets because they're multi and trilingual. They have a competitive edge coming out of high school than a lot of other students. And so, how do we capitalize on that and be able to give families and students opportunities that they may not have otherwise had they not embraced and know this technology?
Well, you have helped us moderate panels on Inside Jam around a variety of topics, gracefully, and I want to ask you about the flip side to kind of the technical education, and this is the idea of soft skills or durable skills or however you want to relate to them. Or there's a movement now that says you can potentially teach those skills, and more to the point, there's a sense that given the vagaries of what the world might look like in 5 or 10 years, given what AI is going to do to entry level work and so forth, that employers might very well be more interested in your soft skills, your durable skills, potentially your language skills, which I think is a fascinating perspective, rather than just your kind of ABCs, your,
Yeah.
reading, writing, arithmetic kind of core skills, because ultimately those might not necessarily be all that necessary.
Exactly. No, I think the human skills are probably going to be more important now in this
Human
transition.
skills, that's a good way to think about them.
The ability to taking the initiative and being able to have sympathy and empathy, understanding and be able to listen to and take things out of context and, make assumptions. These are things that the technology can't do right now. So I think it's important for us to really embrace the human side of our special ability that we have, but at the same time, learn the platform. One of the executives worded it perfectly. He goes, "When you encounter a wild animal when it's an infant, and you nurture and you feed and you have establish a relationship with that wild animal, the chances of it when it's an adult attacking you are going to be dramatically reduced. If you encounter that same wild animal as an adult for the first time, the chances of it attacking you are going to be pretty high because it feels threatened." That stuck with me because
Is AI the wild animal here?
AI is the wild animal.
That's
Yeah. It is just like we have to understand it because as it evolves, we have to evolve. And if we just wait to use it for work or wait to use it to help solve a problem, then I think we're at a disadvantage because, then things are happening in essence to us instead of with us. And so if I am engaging the platform and I'm asking for it for some feedback on a particular initiative or strategy that I'm working on, and it gives it to me, I'm not going to take that version of it. I'm going to push back a little bit and say, well, I don't like the way you said this. Can we reconsider this? And here's actually the direction that I'm trying to go. And you're taking me in this other direction. Well, that iteration is what really learns it. The other thing is the more people use it, another individual said, treat it as onboarding a new employee. If you use it a few times and then you expect it to be this great assistant in a month from now, but you've only used it twice, well, you got another thing coming. The more you engage the platform, the more you iterate it, the more it learns your style, the more it learns your thought process, the better assistant it will be able to help you in the future, which, could potentially provide other opportunities to expand and be more competitive.
So can you teach empathy? Can kids learn empathy? Can kids learn creativity? Can kids learn tolerance of ambiguity? Is that a thing that can
Yes.
actually happen, or are you born? Is that
I
innate?
absolutely believe 100% they could, but it's going to take the adults to model. We're going to have to model it and we're going to have to demonstrate it and we're going to have to show the compassion and we're going to have to let them know that we make mistakes too and thank them for correcting it. All of that stuff, we have to be the model for.
So, when I was a kid, I used to, like a lot of kids, used to question why I need to know this thing that I was being taught. How do you keep kids enthusiastic about learning those kind of core raw language learning, writing skills when this thing uh, does it pretty
Yeah.
well?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a challenge and it's a journey that all of us are going to have to take. What I do know is that the learning needs to be a little bit more personalized than it is right now. A lot of the classrooms, even today, are the kids are learning what the teacher or what the district or what the state expects them to learn, right? Well, you have kids. I had a kindergartner. We did student listening sessions. I had a kindergartner raise his hand when we were having this listening session. He goes, "Mr. Almendarez, I don't learn well sitting down for 6 hours." A kindergartner, and that told me, without him actually saying it, is I'm being talked to and class is boring, and he's in kindergarten. By the time that kid gets to third grade, what enthusiasm is he gonna have left for that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I had a high school senior tell me, Mr. Almendarez, the teacher could have the best lesson plan in the world, but if I know that teacher doesn't care about me, I can care less about that lesson plan. And these are real words. Another middle school young lady said, Mr. Almendarez, I just wish the teacher would pronounce my name correctly, because when she doesn't, she's taking my identity away. And these are all non-academic issues that these kids are having, maybe with the exception of the kindergarten. But what the kids were telling us in the 3 years that we were doing these listening sessions was that there's a disconnect between what the adults expect and what we're going through. And so the question is, how do we meet the kids where they are? And we have to give up the structure that we were so used to and say, what do you want to learn? How do you want to learn it? Here's a tool. We have to be co-learners with the kids instead of facilitators of the kids. And adults are the same way. When we looked and reviewed our process at the principal meetings and the executive cabinet meetings with our assistant superintendents and principals, you cannot deny that our principals are sitting there for 2 hours and the adults from the executive cabinet are talking to them and demanding them change and have an impact on their staff, when in fact we're not changing at all. So we had to mix it up, and it really took some time for us to change up those meetings, to ask the principals, bring your devices. Hey, tell us what you learned today. Are there ways that we can get you the information instead of talking to you about it that would be helpful? And so we had to have these conversations like that.
What's your gut sense for this idea of hyper-personalized, AI-driven learning, where it's relating to the kid and all their concerns that you just outlaid? If they're able to articulate those in a way that says, this is how I'd prefer to be addressed, these are the things that are important to me, these are my things that I'm interested in, and this idea that something can deliver learning through those lenses to the point where the kid is engaged because it's so relatable to them and they're getting it in the way while still delivering the kind of core
Yeah.
learning elements. What's your sense about where that may end up, or whether that's worth pursuing?
I think we have to look at all of our options right now. My only concern would be that there needs to be a human judgment in that entire
Yeah,
process.
right. Not 100%,
Not 100%
personalized, but the idea of kind of
Yeah,
augmenting that human with that. I don't know.
yeah, but I think, especially like in the medical industry, in the manufacturing industry, there are certain things that are going to require the hands of a human, and then there are certain things that aren't going to require the hands of a human. I think we have to address each situation differently, but at every step there needs to be human engagement and involvement in every step of that decision. But I think what we're doing now is not working. Giving a test. I have a 14-year-old ninth grader right now, and I'm scratching my head with some of the homework that he's coming home that is busy work. And I'm like, you would think 5 years into AI, the platforms and all of the staff development on teaching and learning and how these platforms can help, he's coming with packets of information that we could have given kids 10 years ago. It's just crazy how slow we are to embrace change.
Well, and again, that to me is the promise of a hyper-personalized approach through an AI-enabled whatever system, software, something.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, kids are, by the nature of the model of one teacher to many students, some kids are throttled
Yeah.
because they have the ability to go quicker or understand more or move. And obviously some kids need to be brought up to the level. There's a any kind of bell curve you'd expect.
Yeah.
But I hate the idea of throttling kids. I understand the idea of bringing kids up from where they might not be, but the idea of throttling a kid that's ready to keep going and could keep going if they only were given another source of information or another way to engage over and above the
It creates an equity issue, but it's a tough one because
What is the equity issue? That
Well, if kids have access to the throttle up and to the platforms that give them the ability to excel and accelerate their learning
Yeah.
versus those kids that don't have access to those platforms or the ability to excel at their learning, it creates an equity issue there. But at the same time, you don't want to stop kids from growing and
And
from.
do those equity issues kill those types of ideas?
I
I
don't
mean,
think it kills them, but it creates a divide. And so, it takes longer for one community. So, in Santa Ana, we have very wealthy communities and we have not so wealthy communities. Well, if the wealthy community had access and acceleration in their area, but the not so wealthy community didn't, then, what are we doing to those families and to those kids? Those are issues that we're facing across the country. I think we can't stop kids from growing and families from providing opportunities and kids from being excited and wanting to learn more, but maybe there are ways that we can continue that, but have them redirect some of that energy and knowledge to help their classmates or their colleagues or you know people like that aren't don't have the ability to access those resources.
how do you see teachers reacting to this on the whole? I mean, obviously, you're going to have a range of reactions, but you've got what I would consider to be an incredible power here that can be unleashed to benefit kids, but it also comes potentially at the expense of potentially
It's a
teach.
mixed it's a mixed bag right now. And early in the work, early in our embracing the platforms, we brought in the Institute for the Future to help us, reimagine what it meant to lead and to learn and to educate. And in that process, we talked about signals that are out there in society that help. We have to identify to make sense of what's happening. And you're seeing some signals right now come out of LA Unified where they're banning screen time and other districts across the country removing the devices completely. And I'm curious to see how that's going to work out because there's a lot of concern that the kids are spending too much screen time, their mental health, is starting to take effect. But also at the same time, we have teachers' mental health and their capacity. They're already overloaded. When we were doing the student listening sessions and the kids were telling us that the adults in the system really there was a disconnect. We went to the teachers and said, "Hey, here's what the kids are saying. What can we do to support you?" And they're like, "Well, we want to support the kids, but we just don't have the time. Our cognitive load is so heavy. We have to sub classes because there's not enough teachers or subs. We have to do these compliance issues. We have IEP meetings that we have to prepare for. We have to grade all of our paper. We have to do all of these things. The administrator is not, helping." So we went to the administrator and I was like, "How come you're not helping your teachers?" They say, "Because you're pulling us off the school sites, Mr. Almendarez, with all these mandatory meetings." So we just created this quagmire of, situations that people want to help. They just don't have the time to help. Well, this gives people time back. The problem is some people are using the time that they're getting back to actively engage and interact with kids, and some are using it to hurry up and get the work done so I can leave, when I need to leave, or I can sit down and rest. And that's the challenge that we're having right now is how is it being used, and what are we doing with the time that we're getting back?
Well, yeah, I think you're always going to have that, right? You're always going to have that range of any employee or any worker. What I'm curious about is where you see this in 5 years.
Yeah,
I mean, these institutions have been like this for since I was in school,
yeah.
for the most part. Other than maybe the chalkboard is now the smart board, but for the most part, it's the same thing as when I was in school, and that was a long time ago.
And it's not just the public school system; it's the university
Oh,
and our higher ed system too.
Honestly, so my takeaway on that is that the universities, because money comes into universities singularly by the student, they're going to be far more prepared to change quickly because it's a revenue challenge. And once students stop going to university, the whole house of cards comes undone, particularly at the
Yes.
numbers they're paying. But in K through 12, I would argue that the money is, at least in many school districts, is just not break apartable. It's in
Correct.
one bulk. So honestly, there's a less urgent need to, at least from a revenue perspective, there's a less urgent need to pivot.
Well, what the revenue becomes a declining enrollment, and that's the concern. And the crazy thing is, the AI can actually help lift the cognitive load of district leaders if they use it correctly
And
and
is that
use.
how you think? I mean, so while we have a few more minutes, I mean, provide your kind of prescription for what a superintendent or a school system should be thinking about at the moment with regard to potentially using AI to solve some of the systemic problems that already exist.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that districts and county offices should consider is having a AI district architecture. So a structure that's in place that helps the executive cabinet members know how AI is being used and what it's being used for, and then throughout the system, and then have rankings on the opportunities and access to the information that is being used when people are engaging the platforms. And so, like developing board agendas, responding to emails. I had a superintendent that I worked with said, "Mr. Almendarez, I was up till 2 o'clock last night answering all my emails." She said, "There's got to be an easier way. There is an easier way." And so, you take those 2 a.m. email sessions off your plate. You can get to bed at a decent time. You can wake up the next morning, have drafts ready for you to review. And now you're just reviewing drafts instead of having to read each one and, go find the information or who you dish it off to. You just go through the drafts and you approve, or a little bit lighter cognitive load. If I have agenda items that each executive cabinet members are bringing me, then and most of those agenda items are multiple pages, multiple documents. Now, as a superintendent, the expectation is I sit there for 20 minutes to read each page, and I know each document like the back of my hand because I'm making the recommendation to the board. I can have the systems help me do the synthesis and the analysis of it, knowing that my executive cabinet member put the human eyes on it before. And so synthesizing that information for me, giving me the ability to understand it at a level that I'm satisfied with as an executive cabinet member to have a conversation with one of my board members. So these are some examples of things that it can take off. The other operations is with human resources and labor contracts. A lot of questions get thrown at principals or district office about what can we do within the labor agreement, what can we do within board policy. Well, these platforms can help expedite that. What used to take hours or days when running something by legal counsel now can take minutes. Give me an outline that I can be comfortable and confident with. I can go back to the policies and say, is this line true? Is this code the accurate code? And then go and read it and say, yep, this is good. Then give it to legal counsel. And now legal counsel is only spending 15 minutes reviewing it instead of having to charge me for the 2 hours they had to do the work to get it done. Things like that are things that can help reduce the cognitive load. Then you work down to the executive directors with the staff development, the lesson planning, and all that stuff.
It's an absolutely fascinating conversation. It's an amazing time, and as I say, and the reason why we're trying to cover it as fast as we can in as many ways as we can is it's just gonna happen so much quicker than people realize. What's about to happen is going to just not stop or slow down. And so
Here's a concern: you have agentic AI at our doorstep, right? And and
absolutely
which can actually do things and make decisions without you having to tell it to do it, right?
correct.
Well, if as executive cabinet board, the governance team don't understand this technology, a vendor can come in, sell a product to a district, and there could be this gap in there that there's some agentic form to this platform that I'm now using that may or may not be within compliance of the policies and the expectations of the district. And these create the little quagmires for district leaders that we really need to understand, and the guardrails and how platforms are being approved, what decisions these platforms are allowed to make, and stuff like that. So we just because things are happening very quickly.
Well, and I've always said that this revolution isn't going to come in the form of robots. It's going to come in the form of salespeople.
Yeah.
That the salespeople are going to come and sell these amazing products that we haven't even seen yet, that are going to be so compelling and
And
so
they're
cost effective.
And they're using
And
AI to access our LCAPs, our site improvement
well,
plans,
that,
and they're generating email responses and sales opportunities that reflect our district's needs based on the data that's publicly available. So, yeah, I mean,
well, and it gets very messy with regard to compliance issues when you start to incorporate grades and evaluations
yeah,
and assessments and any number of other data, all the data that's available, not all of which is necessarily easily ingested. Well, I guess it's easily ingested, but maybe not necessarily legally ingested or in compliance.
correct.
It's but again, there will be school districts that do it, and they will begin to either run afoul, or quite frankly, more likely, they will begin to accelerate, and
Yeah,
kids will want to be. You'll see an inequity occurring. I don't think there's any question that probably be the case.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's yeah, it's a fascinating time, and we couldn't be happier to have you
Oh, thank
be a part of the conversation. You've got a great perspective, and I love where you're going and what you're doing. And so we'll keep tracking that. We'll certainly be reaching out more to see if we can't get you to help us understand these issues in the future. Best of luck with everything you're doing. Creative Futures Collaborative.
yes.
Um, Love it. We'll keep an eye on all of that. Certainly look forward to talking to you again. Thanks very much for the time.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.